Kate from Zen Stitching, and today I'm going to share with you how to mend your clothes using Sashiko patterns. Sashiko is a Japanese term and means little stabs. It's a beautiful way of creating wonderful patterns on your clothes that not only beautify but also strengthen and repair the clothes at the same time. Whilst they can look quite complex, they are actually relatively easy to sew and a wonderful way to sit and stitch, slow the mind, and also repair your clothes at the same time. It's a win-win for you and the environment. Hand stitching is such a wonderful way to sit and slow down and relax, and it's a wonderful way of meditation, of active meditation. So I actually really look forward to the moments in my life when I can sit and stitch and do some mending. So today I'm going to share with you how to mend some clothes. I'm going to be mending my very favourite studio jeans, and they're called this because they're a pair that I have worn for many years now when I work in the studio. So they're a pair of jeans that when I first had them, I didn't really mind too much if they got dirty or stained or a hole in them, because they were just an old pair of jeans. But as I've spent more and more time working and repairing them, they've actually become quite dear and special to me. So you can see that this is how they look on the front, and this is how they look on the back. There's lots of mends everywhere, particularly around the bottom and on the front around the knees and the upper thighs. So let's change angles and I'll show you how I'm going to mend my jeans. So the first step is to get some fabric to cover the hole. Generally when you're mending, it's good to use a fabric that is of equal weight to the fabric that you're repairing. So in this sense, I've got myself an extra piece of denim, and I've folded over the corners or the edges and ironed them flat. This just makes it a little bit easier to work with for that next stage, and it helps keep everything nice and neat. So now once we've got our fabric, we can put it over the areas that we want to mend. So I can see here that there's a hole here. I want to cover that, and I also want to cover this main hole here. So they're the two areas that I am looking to focus on. Once we've placed our fabric where we want it on to cover the holes, we're then going to pin it in place. Now I like to use safety pins, and that's because the sharp bits are then covered once the pin is holding the fabric in place. I've been caught so many times with pins sticking into my fingers when I'm trying to repair something. So I find that this is a great way of holding the fabric in place and preventing myself from being injured at the same time. So one of the things we need to think about when we're doing our sewing is the choice of needle. If you're interested in the Sashiko style of repairs, then there are a few things that differentiate it between a regular sewing mend. So for example, the needles are longer than a regular needle and they're incredibly sharp. So to give you a comparison, this is say a needle used for needlepoint, and if we compare those next to one another, you can see that the size is quite different. The Sashiko needle is also incredibly sharp. It's designed to go through many layers of cloth, and you can see that it has a largish eye which is big enough to fit the thread through but doesn't kind of change the overall width of the needle. So these Sashiko needles are designed specifically for mending. The other thing that we need to think about is the choice of thread. Now, again, you can use whatever you have at home. My preference is to actually use the Sashiko thread, which is specially designed for mending clothes. It's twisted in such a way that you can't unravel it like you could with, say, for example, a embroidery thread, and it's twisted in just enough to have strength that means that it's really difficult to pull apart, and yet it's soft enough that it will meld in with the fabric rather than sitting on top and continuing to wear away these worn out fabrics. So I'm going to be working with the Sashiko needle and the Sashiko thread, but if you have pearl cotton at home, that's something else that other people like to work with, and you can even use embroidery floss if it's in an area that's just decorative rather than functional. But if you are looking to do long-term repairs, then this is a good one to use. I like this one. So I always like to use a length of thread that stretches from the tip of my finger to an outstretched hand and then across to the opposite shoulder, which works out to be, for the average adult, about 1 meter in length. And to begin, we're going to start by measuring up a grid on our patch. I like to work with imperial for this. I just find it gives us a slightly larger space, which gives the stitch space to create a beautiful pattern. And I also like to use a little bit of soap. This is super awesome to actually mark up patterns on darker fabric. It's environmentally friendly and it washes away without leaving any marks. So the first step is to come in and mark up every 1.5 inch. One of the nice things about using the soap as a way of marking is, because it's a little bit greasier than, say, a dressmaker's chalk, is it has a tendency to stick to the fabric a bit better and is less likely to rub off with handling, which I would find quite frustrating when using the chalk. We're also going to want to do our measurements this way as well. Now this might seem like a lot of preparation, and in some ways it is, but the joy of stitching once the grid has been drawn up, I think, outweighs the time that it takes to set it up. And it's where the Zen comes in with this mindful mending. The whole process is quite a wonderful way just to relax. There we go. So there we have our design all drawn up, and you can see just how clearly the soap works as a way of transcribing or translating our design onto the fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in and stitch the design. This design's going to be a relatively simple one, and the big difference between Sashiko stitching and, say, Western style embroidery is it actually goes in rows from top to bottom like this, and so that's why it becomes quite a strong patch. So the first step will be to sew our verticals, and then we're going to come in and sew the horizontals. What I'm going to do in this particular design is do a stitch along here, leave a space where all these lines intersect, and then another stitch here. So it's going to create these little negative spaces in where the lines meet. So this is the first row that's been stitched, and you can see that it sits within each of these spaces of the grid that I've drawn up, and I'm going to continue to do this stitching for the entire length of the fabric. because denim is so thick, it's good to work with a Sashiko thimble. They actually are very different to what we would be familiar with for regular embroidery. It sits on our middle finger and in the palm of the hand, and you can see that there are a few little dents in there from where I've actually used this to push the needle through the fabric, like so. It just saves you a little bit of finger strength. And the other thing with Sashiko, and the reason why they have longer needles, is because you're looking to gather as much fabric on the needle in one go as comfortably possible. This also ensures that you get a nice straight line when you do your stitching. So there is our second row stitched. I'm going to flip the jeans around and continue in this process. So this is how it looks after stitching all of our vertical rows, and you could even stop here at this point because this is a pretty substantial and solid patch. I'm now going to come back in and stitch along our horizontal rows and creating a similar stitch length that leaves a little space wherever there is, or there used to be, the lines that were created of the grid. I just love the effect that has happened as the fabric gathers a little from this stitching. It's so beautiful. And this is the finished result. It's got this beautiful texture from the fabric just naturally gathering from doing our horizontal and our verticals. And I think this is going to last me for quite some time now. So that's great, I'll be able to wear my studio jeans again. If you would like to know more about mending, or perhaps even participate in one of my online courses, please visit zenstitching.ca.